The Swamp Thing issue 1, Ram V writing, Mike Perkins on art. This is, one of the most anticipated things this week, I think, for us, because Ram V's been kind of killing it. But it is worth mentioning, despite him doing Future State Swamp Thing, this, of course, is the start of a new character who is a new Swamp Thing. And I think at one point in the build-up to this, reading the solicits or whatever, I said it had some Immortal Hulk vibes, and now that I've actually read it, I'm like, yes, this is Immortal Hulk. This is DC's Immortal Hulk. Yeah. Give it to me.
I don't think I'm spoiling anything too much, but saying, oh my god, I love this issue.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And this is probably the best Mike Perkins art's ever been, and I've always liked his art.
I don't think there's a single point in this issue where the Mike Perkins face problem that we tend to have, even in the issues that we like of his. There's usually a handful of faces that look a bit weird, right, or overshadowed. Yeah. There's none of that in this issue. I don't. Is there a different inker? Maybe no. He inks it all himself.
Yeah. It weirdly reminded me of Sorrentino in places.
I think that's the colors.
Yeah, maybe, but like I was like, the shading, even the faces. There was a vibe to it. So, yeah, no. It starts off with a monster story. That's how you hook me.
Yeah, as soon as I read this,
I mean, even
this book is made for us.
Yeah, even before you get to the monster, like it starts off with like a crime scene. It's just like a couple of cops out in the desert investigating this body, and it's kind of weird.
Talking about bugs and maggots, and you're just like, ugh,
It feels like a crime book to start with, and then it's like one of the cops is telling the new forensics guy who's like new to the area. There's a legend, this pale hunter. I think is that what they call him? Pale Wanderer. And tells a story of this soldier who came back from whatever war it was at the time, 1862.
Which means he fled the World War. Civil War.
Civil War. Yeah. And basically, the town went to shit after it because at first, he worked as a hunter and he did random odd jobs. But then kind of fell away from society, and obviously it's kind of a silly legend because he'd be in his 150s or whatever by now or something. But it's this dark story where he eventually became part of the desert, and it's just a legend of this monster.
And again, the art and the coloring, it's all these muted colors and almost watercolor-esque, which is completely at odds with the really vibrant, popping colors of the rest of the issue. It really just sets it apart as this story.
Yeah, it's just, and this is the thing, so you're doing this and you're like, well, okay, it's clearly this is the villain, right? Whatever Swamp Thing we're getting, this is the villain we're talking about right now.
And Bidkar, who's doing the letters, does a trick that I've seen them do a couple of times in this story where it shifts to not having a box behind it. It just, all of a sudden the box fades away and it just becomes the text on the image. And it, you probably don't even realize it as you're reading it, because the idea is you're getting sucked into this story as they're telling it, because this is as they're telling this story, and it just becomes the story. It's wonderful stuff.
Yeah, the older cop, the mustache guy, he's obviously more skeptical and says, cut out this, and he's saying these stories all come from the same thing, but it's this really interesting sentiment he shares before we cut to this new character who's ultimately going to be our new Swamp Thing. Talks about how we recognize something in the lakes and the deserts and the forests and all the sort of more natural parts of the world. There's this thing that we have where the realization that from the moment we're born, we're all trying so violently to be something else, to grow into something different. So the idea of the unknown and the natural is kind of scary to us. And we cut to this it's a really simple panel, but I love this panel of the plane flying through the sky with a lightning bolt, but there's this green colouring to the sky.
This storm that we see over the next few pages, it's this green glow. Instead of the usual dark blues and greys, it's really striking. That again, obviously, this is it's a Swamp Thing book, so we're like, okay, I see the link already.
Yeah,
the green is coming for him,
right? But it's just so striking.
So we're introduced to Levi, this character who's on his way back. From India, where he was visiting his father, his dying father at that. He's on his way back to the US. And there's some hints of maybe protests and violence wherever in India he specifically was, that is kind of building. but he's scared of flying. And he's not scared enough that he wouldn't get on a plane, but he's always nervous when he's on the plane. And the guy next to him's kind of trying to, like, hey, you all right, son? Like, you want some help?
Yeah, it's like, don't worry about it. It's just a storm.
And it turns out he has this nightmare. He is on a plane, he wakes up on the plane, but he has a nightmare. He runs to the bathroom because he thinks he's going to be sick, and he has this nightmare where he turns into, essentially, I mean, it's basically Swamp Thing, but it's more of like a violent, like, explosion of Swamp Thing.
Explodes out of him into this tree.
Yeah.
He becomes an actual tree, and it's spectacular.
And the plane sort of breaks apart because he just rips it in half because he becomes this tree in the middle of the plane. But then he's woken up after they've landed.
What I want to say as well is something I clocked when I was reading it the first time. But before it revealed that this was a dream segment, because it's not immediately clear, right?
No.
Especially as, hey, you could start your story with him turning into Swamp Thing for the first time and destroying a plane. It would be dark as shit, but you could do that if you wanted to. It's the page before when he's like, yeah, okay, I need to go to the bathroom. All the art is a little bit off on that page, and it was really bugging me when I first read it. Like the angles are slightly weird. They're like wavy, like the door to the bathroom is like wavy. And I thought there was something wrong with the art for an issue. Like Perkins had made a mistake. And I was like, what is going on? It was bugging me. And then 2 pages later, and he's waking up. It's a nightmare, and all of a sudden it makes sense. It's this visual clue that no, he's not in reality.
Yeah, honestly, even if it wasn't a nightmare, I'd have said it works because if he's nauseous, it's like the idea of like, this is what he's seeing. Like his vision is getting wavy.
His state of mind isn't right.
Yeah, I think maybe just getting the idea that he feels unbalanced is sort of brought across in that as well. But we're introduced to Jennifer, who's this friend of his who he doesn't admit in the narration. They have been intimate on and off, so it's kind of like a friend/girlfriend that he kind of is, in his life.
It's complicated.
It's complicated, yes. But she picks him up from the airport and wants to hear about the trip and like talking to his father. As mentioned, there are people watching him. There are agents of some kind spying on him,
taking a picture.
Because we get like in the early part of the book, like we see him like there's violence where, assuming where he came from, right? Because he has the newspaper.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
Right. So he looks like he's been bothered by something, whatever happened. So I was like, are these guys, does that have to do with the other? Right? Like, is that why they're following him? Not just because it's something.
Oh, I don't know.
It's whatever.
I actually don't know. But I did.
He was coming back from.
Honestly, it was this whole thing that was like him getting off the plane, getting picked up, and the dream sequence on the plane. It felt really Immortal Hulk to me. And that's not to say that I think this is in any way taking from it. It's just that there is definitely, I think the second you turn Swamp Thing into not a constant thing, but more of a Jekyll and Hyde thing, it becomes DC's Hulk. Because as much as they can try to do with other characters, and as much as you can compare Swamp Thing to, say, Man-Thing, I think Swamp Thing, in terms of scale, in terms of importance to the mythology, is DC's Hulk.
Yeah, and just here, though, too, it's almost whereas Hulk's this primal rage from the mind of a, almost like an abuse survivor kind of deal in Immortal Hulk. Here, it's almost like it's Earth's rage coming out through one person.
Right, and I wouldn't be too surprised if by the end of this 10-issue first season, hoping there's a second already,
right.
So everyone go out and buy it at your stores. But what I'm saying is, I would not be surprised if by the end of this season, he is just Swamp Thing a bit more full-time, like, that's one out.
I think that's possible. Although the way it's playing it so far, like, I could totally see them sticking to this, like, turning into him and turning back. Maybe turning into him would be less horrifying for him by the end of the book, though, because right now it is this delirious thing that seems to be triggered by a number of things, possibly how he's feeling, which again feels kind of Hulk-esque.
Events in the world maybe even more directly impactful, rather than anything that's personally him. For whatever reason, he's been chosen, but it's maybe not him triggering it, but more the Green being like, no, we're needed here now.
Yeah, because obviously we see these cops are investigating stuff, and they're tracking down, because the body that's there, they suspect that's this is where people dump bodies because they know that the wilderness will kind of just take care of them, and they're attacking this guy, or attacking. They're hunting down, looking for this guy who's getting attacked by this monster, it's also a POV, but then we eventually see him. And he's got like the two hands, like he's ripped off two hands from someone.
Yeah.
And there's this big shadow. It's really good. And one of the cops is like chasing him with a shotgun. So this is sort of playing out as we're cutting back and forth. And again, but I love that it's playing with the intimacy. It's like him, like, okay, him and this Jennifer, Levi and Jennifer, we're getting to know what their connection is, that she does clearly deeply care for him. And maybe even the reason why they're not a full-time relationship is probably just because he is so standoffish and kind of like, broody and weird and emotional. But damn, that page where he like goes to sleep and there's like leaves around him and it's just his face in the darkness. Like I was getting like serious, like almost Sandman era, like Vertigo Comics vibes from this.
I get that, and I think it's these pages as well where we see these flashes in the orange, which is such a stark contrast to the green. That I think Matt is onto something when he's saying it's something to do with those protests or what exactly was going on, because this looks like some memories are to do with his stuff and he's seeing those things.
There's some hints here that his brother, who was involved in the protests, made some sort of pact with something, so it may actually be his brother's fault that he has become Swamp Thing.
Right.
At least that's.
And he's talking about like the burning of the forest, and like he can't remember exactly what happened, so he's getting flashes of it.
Because we kind of glossed over it, but because we see like a sort of another quick flash here of his father dying and forgiving him. But he says, "Levi, I forgive you," rather than "Levi, I am sorry," which is what we expect him to say, because what we hear from Levi is his father kind of disowned him for leaving and not being like a loyal son, which is what his brother. Which is what he saw his brother as. He saw him as the loyal son. So it's sort of like doing this, but then of course he turns into Swamp Thing, and he's basically called to
just on the actual final bit of this page where he calls the Eldritch Green, which I think is very telling of the direction Rambi is wanting to have this approach here.
Yeah. But he's called to where this monster attack's happening in the desert. I never actually quite got it because it says the Sonoran Desert. Do you know what that is, Matt? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, the Sonoran Desert's it runs like New Mexico, Arizona.
I assumed it was
along the border.
I assumed it was in that general area, but I didn't really know for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the guy's speaking Spanish as he's running, and it's a big desert that runs along the border there.
So, but of course, when just as the sheriff or whoever it is about to get nabbed by this monster, this Swamp Thing appears, and I do think it's a bit more demonic looking. This Swamp Thing.
I love how it bursts out of the cactus.
Yeah, like even there's that 2-page layout where you see it. It's not as full as normal Swamp Thing. There's a lot of like gaps in between the veins, and
what it says to me is there wasn't enough green for it to transform from. Usually something grows from stuff, right? When he's traveling from place to place. Right now, the power's not there to form out of nothing. It has to transform the cactus that's there, and there's not enough greenery there to use.
But these visuals of this Swamp Thing and it looking so horrifying is again another thing that made me think of Immortal Hulk, in the sense that Immortal Hulk took Hulk and made it a horror book. This feels like a horror book through and through. It feels horrifying. The end of the issue though is just as he's encountering this monster man, whatever's made him this way, he's pulled back, and he pops out of a tree in Central Park. It's worth mentioning Jennifer's apartment where he went was in New York, so that's sort of in the vicinity of where he originally was, but not obviously exactly. Which makes me wonder, like, did he actually, like, as Swamp Thing, go to the tree or go to Central Park and use the green to like travel? To
depends. Does she have any plants in her living room?
Oh, maybe, yeah. But
in fact, I think she does. I think that's where those leaves come from. If you go back to that page that you liked so much. If you look just above that page, the top panel, just above that, where he's lying on the sofa.
Oh, there's a plant.
You can see a little plant just above his head.
Yeah.
But no, he comes out of the tree in Central Park and he just sort of lies there in his pajamas, and it's very Hulk waking up, like after a morning of Hulk rampaging almost.
Right. But you've also kind of jumped over the most interesting part of the entire issue.
Hold on.
This conversation.
One final point on this final panel though. He's in a very fetal position as well. I think that's probably worth noting for thematic sake.
Almost as if he's been reborn.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what are you saying, Connor?
Yeah, the conversation he has with the monster that I'm assuming is the Pale Wanderer, because it kind of seems to match up with the story. I
always assumed it was him, yeah.
Yeah, never outrises, but I think it's a reasonable assumption. But the idea that he talks about he's actually a desert who dreamed of being a man. Which I think is really interesting. The idea that he wasn't the man first. This is the personification of the desert.
Whereas-
It's the same way he's the
right, whereas
personification of the green.
Right. He took over, right, that farmer, and then became that story. And because they talk about like all that soldier wanted to do is go back to his home and be left alone, and he would chase people away, you know. And
Yeah, and they talk about it's especially when newcomers come to the desert. It's theirs.
right.
But I think it's really interesting. Yeah, we've got various, red, green, rot. Take your pick. The idea that there's more out there as well, like this is this one desert personified into a being.
Yeah, like
And the idea
what
of
if,
it-
yeah, what if this is the idea that it's not just like because obviously we talk about the red, the green, the rot. They're kind of universal things that apply to everything that is in that umbrella across the entire planet, arguably across the entire existence. What if the idea here is that like not so much that deserts in general have like a personification or a sentience of some kind of force that becomes something. It's that like you say, just this one desert wanted to be alive. So
Yes, it would be like the idea of, I think, to use the where this book goes is Central Park could have its own being, essentially, that it took over as it's still Central Park. It's just Central Park that walks around.
I don't think it is Central Park though. That Swamp Thing is though, for the record.
No, I don't either. I was just using that as an example to compare it to. This is the one desert that you could have one for just Central Park's. Swamp Thing still though
personified.
is the green is everything.
Yeah, that said though, I do think it's. I don't think like something that small should like because the way Matt described it, it sounds like this desert's quite expansive, and
yes, And so I don't necessarily think it's the Sonoran. I think it's that area, right? And I'm thinking to Ram's Justice League Dark story, Connor, where they went to Africa and they dealt with the whole ideas. Right?
And that comes back in here, right?
Right, and it wasn't exactly the green and red and rot. It went a little bit deeper, and that's what I feel like here is it's tying, because we saw what he did with the green there.
Yeah.
By it, it inhabited the other place, and maybe because of that, this is what leads to the green as an idea persisting, and the idea of whatever the Pale Wanderer is. They come from the same place there.
It does perhaps make me wonder if this Swamp Thing is even actually the guardian of the green like Swamp Thing typically is.
I would say yes and no. I think it's more accurately it is the green. In the same way that this Pale Wanderer is the desert, and it, this particular desert, and it took over this person. The dialogue is you're a newborn thing, a child. I think he's not just talking to Levi here. I think he's talking to the green, who has, basically has had to rebirth itself. Yeah.
Right.
And this idea that, he talks about, again, combining to ideas, like talked about in Justice League Dark and storytelling, they don't die. You can't kill an idea. You just subsume it and work it into your narrative. And one will work, one will win out.
Well, why is the green had to be reborn? Explain that part.
So in Justice League Dark, basically Swamp Thing, Alec Holland, had to sacrifice himself so Zatanna could basically get control of the Upside Down Man, right?
Yeah, like the planet where the Upside Down Man came from, like that world, that dimension.
Mm-hmm.
The green through Swamp Thing had to create life there and gave itself up to be the green there, so that it would establish order and reality and rules and break the Upside Down Man's inconsistent logic.
Right, and in that it broke the control, right, and it went from being disorder.
Well, I don't feel bad then. I didn't get that the green itself has been reborn because I didn't read Justice League Dark.
Right, but I don't think you need to. I can just think that this is a new form of Swamp Thing in the way that when they brought him back in Brightest Day, up to that point, Swamp Thing had been the memory of Alec Holland, right? In whatever made up the Swamp Thing. Whereas post Brightest Day, he was Alec Holland again, right? In the green, in that way. Now here, the green's been, I don't want to say reborn, but it's been reconstituted to whatever happened in India, right? That chose Levi. This is the new version. So it's not necessarily maybe an avatar like we're used to with the parliaments.
From what you're saying, it doesn't sound to me like there's going to be a parliament. It sounds like that's gone.
No.
And this is a complete fresh start.
Foreseeable future, yeah.
Right, and that's where Connor was getting at, where he is the green, as if the Pale Wanderer is desolation, because that's almost what it is. It's almost not necessarily the desert, but the idea of
which is why I think
nothing.
Perhaps the rules here are going to be a little bit different. If he's not actually an avatar like Swamp Thing usually is, that's maybe why he will be transitioning back and forth, and it's not a permanent thing.
Right.
Maybe why the rules are just completely different.
Possibly, and I think why I think though by the end it might be Swamp Thing all the time is in the same way that the Pale Wanderer has been, is not that man anymore. He is the desert in that body. I wonder if by the end of this, there's a chance that this will be the green in the body of Levi, as opposed to before, where it was. It depends. It was Alec Holland in the body of the Swamp Thing.
It depends what direction they want to go in, because I mean, the whole point of the story could be that's the warning. Let the story.
It might be, yeah. It might be that maybe he needs to find balance by the end.
Yeah, maybe he has to. The point is for him to learn to not let it take over completely. But
right.
That's just a case of whatever the story wants to go to.
And that goes in with the original, with Swamp Thing being the avatar and wanting to find balance for the green, right? Whereas we were introduced to that concept with the green and the red and the rot, that they all try to have balance, but when one tries to oversee the other, that's when things get wonky, right? When the red ends up having a champion that goes too far, it throws that balance completely off. So here, this almost gets rid of that whole parliament idea.
The Pale Wanderer is an interesting one, because obviously he's been around for a long time, but does the balance of the red, the green, and the rot, like, does that see something like him existing as unnatural and as an anomaly that should be rectified? Or
I would say no. I think he is like a lesser being essentially to them. Yeah. Essentially, if to put this on par, if the red, green, and rot are humanity, then things like this, the Pale Wanderer, they're like dogs. They're there. They're around, but they're not running the planet in the same way.
I think what he's trying to say.
Clearly, don't have pets.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say, Matt, is that the Pale Wanderer's a mid-carder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be, but sometimes the
again.
Yeah, but sometimes the mid-carder can end up gaining such a following.
Oh yeah.
That you have no choice but to put them, and maybe that's what this waking up, whatever the green felt the pull there, right? Maybe that's what the Pale Wanderer wanted. So who knows? I do know but I just want to touch on before we move on this idea of Eldritch. Like, I know it's tied to Lovecraft, right?
Yeah.
But what does that exactly mean? Is it like a cosmic terror kind of deal?
I think it's the unknown, more specifically.
The unknown?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that's what this is, the unknown green, then it's a new form.
Unknown and to some extent incomprehensible by our puny human minds.
Yes.
As this whole last 20 minutes has been, right? Us trying to piece together exactly what it is.
I thought Matt was going to say, as this whole last 20 minutes has been, me trying to listen to you two talk about it.
No.
I think
I take it part as well.
Yet another issue showcasing why Ramvi is the best new talent DC has had in years.
For real.
Yeah.
Now, after this, when we're done, Connor, I need to talk to you about his other books, just to find out exactly if they're my kind of thing.
These Savage Shores is 100% your kind of thing.
I think
that's what that was my next question.
I mean, it's Ramvi and Tom King, right? Although they both do very different things, but I think you look at Mr. Miracle, you look at.
I think Ramvi is more exciting to me on an ongoing book.
Sure, they have different strengths, that's for sure. But I mean,
and I think maybe it's safe to say maybe it's because I haven't seen a Ramvi book as of yet go long enough to ruin itself, like Tom King's Batman did, for example. Whereas Tom King in a confined setting, I can absolutely love.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There is a creator-owned vibe to the stuff that we liked out of those two guys too. Like, we tend to prefer when it's Tom King doing, like, sure, Mr. Miracle's not his character, but he's definitely doing his take on the character.
It's interesting because I think this Swamp Thing falls in the same lines as of any of those Tom King prestige series where I can see this in a bookstore for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas his Catwoman run or his Justice League Dark, they feel more traditional DC books, even though like Catwoman is more of a crime book, and you could say there's an indie influence from that. It still feels like it's an ongoing DC book as well, where it doesn't feel like this is designed for one amazing trade that will sell for years, whereas this definitely does. It's a bit different.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Matt, what are you rating that?
This is 9.5.
Connor?
I'm going to give it the 10.
Yeah. Figured you would.
I'm going to go with the 9.5 as well. It's pretty exceptional. Nigh on perfect, but super atmospheric, very exciting. It's an introduction of a new character as well. And this is the thing: if you introduce a new character, you do it in a book as good as this, and no one is going to critique that it's a new character. No one. We're all just going to be excited by a new character, and it's good. It's fine.